He was 10 when he learned what silence feels like. Not the quiet of a calm morning, but the kind that sits heavy on the chest, the kind that makes a small boy count the cracks on a sidewalk just to avoid counting the hours. Ian stood by the curb with a cloth bag, the kind used for groceries. Inside it were 2 shirts, a comb with missing teeth, a marble he kept for luck, and a folded paper with a few words written by his mother. "Be brave. We will come back." The street was the same as always, laundry lines in the wind, a radio humming somewhere, a kettle boiling in a nearby tea shop, but the day felt different. He watched the corner where his family had disappeared and told himself they were late, not gone. By sunset, the sky turned soft orange. By nightfall, he understood the difference between late and never. He slept that night near the tea shop, his back against the wall that felt warm from the day's heat. The owner, an older man with a gentle face, noticed him but didn't ask questions. In the morning, Ian swept the floor before anyone came. He lined up the metal stools, wiped them with a damp cloth, and waited. When the owner arrived, he nodded at the clean floor and placed a small cup of tea and a half bun on the counter. "For you," he said, as if it were nothing at all. Ian thanked him in a small voice, like a whisper learning to speak. Word spread quietly there was a boy sleeping near the shop, and most people did nothing with that information. A few offered a coin, most offered nothing, and some offered looks that told him he should vanish like steam. But he did not vanish. He stood straighter each morning, told himself to smile even when he did not feel like smiling, and tried to move with purpose. He learned that days are easier when they have a shape. In the early hours, he would push a broom across the shop floor and stack cups. After sunrise, he carried crates for the fruit vendor 2 streets away. He liked the weight in his hands. It made him feel strong in a simple way. The vendor taught him how to choose good oranges and how to check for ripe mangoes with a light press of the thumb. "Look for the softness, but not too much," the vendor said. Ian listened carefully. Each tip felt like a small gift. By noon, he would return to the tea shop. He watched how the owner served with 2 hands, how he wiped a spill without fuss, how he greeted each customer as if they were important. Ian copied this manner. He cleaned the counter, refilled sugar jars, and kept a small notebook where he wrote the day's earnings from odd jobs, tiny amounts that still made him feel rich, because they were his. Every afternoon, he walked past the school on the corner and stood outside the fence. He liked the sound of chalk on the board and the way a teacher's voice rose and fell like a song. Sometimes he sat on the little wall under the neem tree and listened to lessons he could not join. One day, a young teacher noticed the quiet boy who kept showing up at the same time. She stepped outside during a break and smiled. "Do you like stories?" she asked. He nodded. She gave him a thin book, its cover worn out but the pages neat. "Bring it back when you finish," she said. Ian held the book like a precious dish that might break. He read slowly at the tea shop after closing, moving his finger under each line. When he met words he did not know, he wrote them in his notebook and asked the shop owner or the fruit vendor. Little by little, his notebook filled with words and their meanings, like seeds waiting for rain. One evening, when clouds gathered and the smell of wet earth filled the lanes, Ian looked for a place to stay dry. He found the bus stand, half empty, with people pulling their shawls tight and watching the sky. A small dog sat shaking near a pillar, its eyes big and hopeful. Without thinking, Ian tore a piece from his bread roll and placed it on the ground. The dog edged close, careful and polite, and ate. "Chai," he said softly, naming the dog after the tea that had become part of his life. The name fit. Chai followed him to the tea shop and sat outside as if keeping watch. At night, when Ian lay down near the wall, Chai curled near his feet like a warm, breathing blanket. Having a friend, even a small one with soft ears, made the nights feel shorter and the mornings brighter. He talked to Chai in whispers and told him things he could not tell anyone else. "I'm learning to be strong, I will find a way, and sometimes, I miss them." A volunteer from the community center started noticing the boy with the steady hands and the steady eyes. His name was Mr. Rahim, and he liked to arrive before dawn to set up blankets and stack soap in neat rows for anyone who needed it. One morning, he called out to Ayan politely. "You sweep well. Do you want to sweep here too?" Ayan nodded. The work came with a clean corner to sleep in and a blanket that smelled like sunlight. In the corner of the center, he found a quiet space where his bag and notebook could sit without fear. Mr. Rahim asked simple questions, never too many. "How old are you?" 10. "What do you like?" "Books." "Books are good," Mr. Rahim said, and that was the end of it for the day. It felt safe not to explain everything. It felt good to be seen without being pressed open like a door. With a roof over his head, Ayan gave his days more shape. He made a small schedule in his notebook. Sweep the tea shop at dawn. Carry fruit crates after sunrise. Read 2 pages after lunch. Return to the community center to help set chairs, fold blankets, and sort donated clothes. He drew check boxes next to the list and ticked them with a small thrill each time. On days when the list was complete, he allowed himself a reward, sitting by the lake outside the park for 30 minutes and staring at the water. The lake did not change. It was there on good days and on bad days. That steadiness comforted him. He learned that some things do not leave, and that knowledge was like a small lamp inside him. Sometimes other boys his age tried to pull him into aimless afternoons. "Come, leave this work. We'll wander." He would smile and say, "Maybe another day," and then go back to stacking cups. He did not think he was better than them, he just knew drifting felt like letting go of something he had worked hard to hold. When he met trouble, he chose distance. When he met kindness, he chose gratitude. At the public library's back door, a guard with a thick mustache saw him reading outside and said, "If you sit quietly, you may come in." Ayan came in. He sat near the window, away from the tables where others spoke in low voices, and read about people who turned small beginnings into gentle power. He found a book about a man in his city who built a life of service, and he underlined a sentence in his notebook, "You do not need to be rich to be generous." Weeks turned into months, measured by the growth of his handwriting and the height of the stack of borrowed books. He saved coins in a small tin and, after many careful days, bought a second-hand pair of shoes. They were not shiny, but they fit, and the first time he laced them, he felt taller. The young teacher at the school called him over one afternoon and handed him a used exercise book and a pencil almost as long as his forearm. "For your words," she said. He did not know how to repay her, so he returned what he could. He swept the pathway under the neem tree and watered the plants every evening. Once, the fruit vendor slipped an extra orange into the crate and said, "For the strong boy." Ayan smiled and cut it in half, sharing with Chai. He discovered that joy could be simple: a book, a cup of tea, a half orange, a clean corner to sleep. The community around him began to recognize the pattern of his days. The tailor, who always kept a pin behind his ear, asked Ayan to pick up spools of thread from the wholesaler. The pharmacist trusted him to carry small boxes to the clinic. A grandmother on the 3rd floor waved from her balcony and threw down a bag of vegetable peels for the compost pile he kept behind the tea shop. He became a small helper in a big neighborhood, and with every small task done well, he stitched himself into the fabric of the place. He learned names, remembered birthdays, and greeted the morning newspaper man by name. The city could be loud and fast, but Ayan moved through it with quiet purpose, like a steady drumbeat under a song. On the nights when the sky was clear, he loved to climb the stairs to the community center roof and lie on his back to watch the stars. Chai would rest his head on Ayan's side, and the cool air would brush past gently. He would think about the note in his bag, "Be brave. We will come back." For a long time, those words hurt. Over time, the pain changed shape. The line "Be brave" grew bigger than the line "We will come back." He did not stop wishing, but he stopped waiting. He began to believe it was possible to carry a missing piece and still be whole. He whispered small promises to the night sky: he would be kind, he would be steady, he would learn something new every week. He promised to become the sort of person he needed when he was 10 and alone with a cloth bag. And so the first chapter of his life did not end with grand gestures or big headlines. It ended with a simple scene: a boy finishing his tasks for the day, washing his face at a tap, placing his notebook under his head like a pillow, and closing his eyes with a plan for tomorrow. He could not change where he started, but he could decide how to walk. He chose to walk with care. He chose not to let bitterness write his story. Standing at the edge of childhood, he discovered something strong and quiet inside himself. It was not loud. It did not shout. It was the kind of strength that holds doors for others, that says thank you for a half bun and a cup of tea, that returns books on time and hands them to the next reader with a smile. He did not know what the next 20 years would bring. He only knew that tomorrow, he would wake before dawn, sweep the floor, and take one more honest step. Ian's teenage years arrived quietly but carried heavy weight. Childhood had given him a kind of rough survival strength, but now, as he stepped into adolescence, the world asked for more from him. His shoulders grew broader, his hands stronger, yet his heart often felt heavier than before. Life did not ease for him just because he had grown older, it tested him in deeper ways. Each morning still began before the sun. He swept the tea shop floor with steady strokes, careful not to miss a corner. Customers often came in half asleep, rubbing their eyes, ordering tea in low voices. Some never noticed the boy who served them water or carried trays. Others gave him a quick nod of thanks. He accepted both with the same calm face. Work gave him dignity, even when the pay was small. He saved every coin he could in the same tin box, hidden under his thin blanket at the community center. But the streets were not always kind to boys his age. Some laughed at him for working instead of wandering. "Why waste your time?" they mocked. "You'll be nothing more than a servant." Their words stung, but he learned not to answer back. He realized silence was sometimes stronger than argument. Still, deep inside, their voices stayed with him, echoing like shadows that whispered at night. There were moments when he sat on the rooftop, looking at the stars, wondering if maybe they were right. Was he building something, or was he just surviving? Hunger remained a regular visitor. On many nights, the tea shop owner's half bun was the only thing he ate all day. Sometimes he tried to stretch the bread by dipping it slowly in tea, making it last longer. Yet, even in hunger, he shared with Chai, the little dog who never left his side. Watching Chai wag his tail for a small piece of bread reminded Ian that loyalty and love could live even in the smallest things. The dog had no reason to stay with him, but he did. That thought gave Ian strength. One year, the fruit vendor fell ill and could not work for weeks. Ian took it upon himself to help. He woke earlier, opened the stall, arranged the fruit carefully, and dealt with customers. Some cheated him, giving less money than they owed, thinking he would not notice. But many others respected his honesty and even pressed an extra coin into his palm. "You are a good boy," one woman told him. "You'll go far." He held those words close, repeating them in his mind whenever doubt returned. The young teacher at the school, Miss Farah, continued to notice him. She gave him more old books and sometimes taught him after school by the neem tree. He would copy down everything she said in his notebook. "Education is a key," she reminded him often. "One day, you'll open a door others cannot see yet." Ian believed her. Even when his body was tired from lifting crates or sweeping floors, he pushed himself to read a page before sleeping. Each page felt like a step toward that hidden door. Still, the struggle grew harder as he entered his mid-teens. His clothes wore out faster, his shoes had holes, and the cold winters cut through his thin blanket. He often wrapped Chai around himself for warmth. There were days he wanted to give up, to stop fighting against a life that seemed unfair. But then something inside reminded him giving up would mean losing not just his fight but also the faith of the people who had shown him kindness. Mr. Rahim, the community center volunteer, once placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "You are stronger than you think. One day you will surprise even yourself." Those words lit a fire in him. Temptations knocked at his door too. Some older boys from the street tried to drag him into easy but dangerous ways of earning money. They spoke of quick cash through theft, tricks, and lies. "Why break your back carrying crates?" they teased. "One night's work and you'll eat like a king." For a moment, Ian was tempted. Hunger can make even a good heart weak. But he remembered Miss Farah's words, the fruit vendor's trust, and Mr. Rahim's steady belief. He turned away, choosing the harder road of patience and honesty. By 16, his body was strong enough to handle tougher work. He started helping a mechanic, learning how engines worked and how wheels carried stories of long roads. Grease stained his hands, but he didn't mind. He liked fixing things, making broken machines breathe again. The mechanic, though strict, saw his effort and began to trust him with more tasks. "One day, you'll be better than me," he said gruffly, but Ian caught the hint of pride in his eyes. At night, exhaustion pressed on his bones, yet his hunger to learn kept him awake. He read about men and women who rose from poverty to greatness. He discovered stories of leaders who once slept on streets, of writers who once had no books of their own, of inventors who once had nothing but dreams. These stories made him believe that he, too, had a place in the world, even if he had not found it yet. And then came a turning moment. At 17, he entered a writing contest held by the community center. Miss Farah encouraged him, handing him paper and saying, "Write about your life. Write what you know." He hesitated at first, unsure if his story mattered. But he wrote anyway. He wrote about hunger, about the tea shop, about kindness in small gestures, about a dog named Chai who never left him. His words were simple but true, and when he read them aloud, the room grew silent. People looked at him not as the abandoned boy anymore, but as a storyteller. His essay won first place, and with it came a small scholarship to continue his studies. For the first time, Ian felt the ground under his feet shift. He realized that his struggles were not just wounds, they were lessons, gifts that gave him strength and voice. That night, as he held the certificate in his hands, he whispered to Chai, "We are going somewhere. I don't know where yet, but we are." He knew the road ahead was still long and hard, but something inside him had changed. The boy who once only swept floors and carried crates now carried hope. And hope, he discovered, was heavier than hunger but far more powerful. By the time Ian stepped into his late teenage years, the weight of the past still lived inside him, but something new was beginning to rise. His life was no longer just about survival. For the first time, he began to feel the pull of possibility. The boy who once slept under tea shop counters now carried with him a small but steady light, the belief that tomorrow could be different from yesterday. The scholarship from the writing contest changed more than just his routine, it changed how people saw him. The neighborhood that once whispered about the abandoned child now looked at him with quiet respect. At the community center, people often asked him to read his essay again. Each time he stood up, his voice grew stronger, his words clearer. He was no longer the silent boy sweeping floors, he was someone with a story worth hearing. But life still tested him. With his scholarship, he joined evening classes, sitting among students who wore neat uniforms and carried polished bags. Ian arrived in his worn shirt, his shoes still patched at the sole. At first, some classmates laughed, whispering behind his back. He pretended not to hear, but deep inside, the familiar ache returned. He reminded himself of Miss Farah's words, "Education is a key." Each evening, he chose to turn the key, no matter how heavy the lock seemed. The turning point came on a day that seemed ordinary at first. He had gone to the mechanic's shop, where he had been working part-time, when a customer arrived with a broken motorcycle. The customer was impatient, a businessman in a hurry. The mechanic was busy with another job, so he asked Ian to take a look. Ian rolled up his sleeves, inspected the engine, and carefully adjusted the carburetor. Within minutes, the motorcycle roared back to life. The businessman was stunned. "Who taught you that?" he asked. Ian answered honestly, "I watch and practice." The man nodded slowly, then handed him a card. "If you ever want to learn formally, come to this address. I run a technical institute. We need boys like you, sharp and hard-working." That night, Ian turned the card over and over in his hands. It felt like destiny was finally knocking at his door. With Mr. Rahim's encouragement, he visited the institute the following week. The classrooms were filled with machines, wires, and engines, things he had only dreamed of touching. The director agreed to let him study there at a discounted fee, impressed by his natural skill and determination. To cover the remaining cost, Ian worked double shifts, days at the tea shop, evenings fixing bicycles, and late nights studying. His body grew tired, but his spirit felt alive. Months passed, and his progress amazed his teachers. He built small models of engines, solved problems others struggled with, and even began teaching younger students. For the first time in his life, he felt what it meant to be ahead instead of behind. The boy who once learned words under a neem tree was now explaining machines to others. One evening, the institute arranged a small exhibition. Students were asked to present projects. Ian, nervous but excited, prepared a model of a water pump that could run with less fuel. It was simple but practical, designed for small farmers who could not afford expensive machines. When he presented it, the audience listened carefully. Among them was a local entrepreneur who specialized in agricultural equipment. He approached Ian after the show. "This idea can help many people. Do you want to work with us?" That moment was the true turning point of his life. It was no longer about just surviving each day. His work was beginning to create value for others. Still, Ian did not forget the streets he had walked barefoot, the nights he had shared half a bun with chai, the kindness of strangers who saw more in him than his torn clothes. He returned often to the community center, speaking to younger children who faced the same pain he once knew. He told them, "Your story is not over just because it started hard. You can write new chapters." And slowly, his life began to climb. From a boy abandoned on the street, he was becoming a man with skills, with knowledge, with opportunities opening before him. But deep down, he still carried one unanswered question: what had happened to the family that left him behind? That question rested quietly in his heart, waiting for the day when fate would bring answers. By the time Ian stepped into his late teenage years, the weight of the past still lived inside him, but something new was beginning to rise. His life was no longer just about survival. For the first time, he began to feel the pull of possibility. The boy who once slept under tea shop counters now carried with him a small but steady light, the belief that tomorrow could be different from yesterday. The scholarship from the writing contest changed more than just his routine, it changed how people saw him. The neighborhood that once whispered about the abandoned child now looked at him with quiet respect. At the community center, people often asked him to read his essay again. Each time he stood up, his voice grew stronger, his words clearer. He was no longer the silent boy sweeping floors, he was someone with a story worth hearing. But life still tested him. With his scholarship, he joined evening classes, sitting among students who wore neat uniforms and carried polished bags. Ian arrived in his worn shirt, his shoes still patched at the sole. At first, some classmates laughed, whispering behind his back. He pretended not to hear, but deep inside, the familiar ache returned. He reminded himself of Miss Farah's words, "Education is a key." Each evening, he chose to turn the key, no matter how heavy the lock seemed. The turning point came on a day that seemed ordinary at first. He had gone to the mechanic's shop, where he had been working part-time, when a customer arrived with a broken motorcycle. The customer was impatient, a businessman in a hurry. The mechanic was busy with another job, so he asked Ian to take a look. Ian rolled up his sleeves, inspected the engine, and carefully adjusted the carburetor. Within minutes, the motorcycle roared back to life. The businessman was stunned. "Who taught you that?" he asked. Ian answered honestly, "I watch and practice." The man nodded slowly, then handed him a card. "If you ever want to learn formally, come to this address. I run a technical institute. We need boys like you, sharp and hard-working." That night, Ian turned the card over and over in his hands. It felt like destiny was finally knocking at his door. With Mr. Rahim's encouragement, he visited the institute the following week. The classrooms were filled with machines, wires, and engines, things he had only dreamed of touching. The director agreed to let him study there at a discounted fee, impressed by his natural skill and determination. To cover the remaining cost, Ian worked double shifts, days at the tea shop, evenings fixing bicycles, and late nights studying. His body grew tired, but his spirit felt alive. Months passed, and his progress amazed his teachers. He built small models of engines, solved problems others struggled with, and even began teaching younger students. For the first time in his life, he felt what it meant to be ahead instead of behind. The boy who once learned words under a neem tree was now explaining machines to others. One evening, the institute arranged a small exhibition. Students were asked to present projects. Ian, nervous but excited, prepared a model of a water pump that could run with less fuel. It was simple but practical, designed for small farmers who could not afford expensive machines. When he presented it, the audience listened carefully. Among them was a local entrepreneur who specialized in agricultural equipment. He approached Ian after the show. "This idea can help many people. Do you want to work with us?" That moment was the true turning point of his life. It was no longer about just surviving each day. His work was beginning to create value for others. Still, Ian did not forget the streets he had walked barefoot, the nights he had shared half a bun with chai, the kindness of strangers who saw more in him than his torn clothes. He returned often to the community center, speaking to younger children who faced the same pain he once knew. He told them, "Your story is not over just because it started hard. You can write new chapters." And slowly, his life began to climb. From a boy abandoned on the street, he was becoming a man with skills, with knowledge, with opportunities opening before him. But deep down, he still carried one unanswered question: what had happened to the family that left him behind? That question rested quietly in his heart, waiting for the day when fate would bring answers. 20 years after being left behind, Ian's life was not just a story of survival, it was a story of triumph, forgiveness, and quiet greatness. The boy who once sat outside a school gate with borrowed books was now a man who had built doors for others to walk through. The reunion with his mother marked a new chapter. At first, it was not easy. Old wounds reopened. Ian had questions that could not be answered simply. Why him? Why then? Why in that way? His mother wept often, explaining that hunger and desperation had left them with no choice. His siblings had scattered, each struggling with their own fate. For days, Ian wrestled with the weight of it. Yet, in the end, he decided not to let bitterness define him. He had already lived his life proving that pain could become strength. Now he would prove that forgiveness could become peace. He invited his mother to live with him. His home was modest but warm, filled with books, machines, and the gentle sound of Hai's paws on the floor. She often sat in the courtyard, watching him work, her eyes soft with pride and regret. Sometimes she whispered, "You became more than I ever dreamed." And he would reply quietly, "I became what I had to." His work grew beyond machines. He began programs for children who, like him, had been left behind: orphans, street children, and those too poor to attend school. He set up scholarships in his own workshop's name, giving them books, training, and above all, hope. At the community center where he once swept floors, he built a library corner, stocked with hundreds of books. The children who once stared at life through fences could now sit on chairs and read under bright lights. People from the city and even other towns began to recognize him. They invited him to speak at schools and colleges. He never spoke with the language of a polished man, he spoke with the language of truth. He told them how he once ate half a bun with a stray dog, how he slept on floors, how he carried crates heavier than his body. Your beginnings, he told them, do not control your endings. You can always write the next page yourself. His speeches drew standing applause, not because they were fancy, but because they were real. At 35, Ian stood at the opening ceremony of his first full-scale factory. Behind him was a banner with his name, but in his heart, he remembered the tea shop where it had all begun. He asked the old tea shop owner, the fruit vendor, Miss Farah, and Mr. Rahim to stand beside him as guests of honor. These, he told the crowd, are the people who carried me when I could not carry myself. Tears filled many eyes, including his own. His story reached newspapers, then magazines, and soon people began calling him an inspiration. But he never allowed pride to cloud his heart. At home, he was still the boy who liked simple bread and tea, still the man who sat under the stars with his faithful dog. Chai had grown old, his steps slower, his fur grayer, but he was still by Ian's side, reminding him that loyalty outlasts time. In quiet moments, Ian thought about the circle of life. He had been abandoned, but he was never truly alone. Strangers became family, kindness became a guide, and patience became his strength. Now, he stood not as a victim but as a builder of futures. The boy who once whispered promises to the night sky had kept them. He had been kind, he had been steady, and he had become the person he once needed. The story of Ian's life closed not with anger or revenge but with peace. He forgave his past, embraced his present, and built a future for others. When people asked him how he had done it, he always gave the same answer, one honest step at a time. And so, the boy abandoned by his family turned his pain into purpose, his loneliness into leadership, and his hunger into hope. His life became a reminder to the world that no matter how dark the beginning, the ending can still shine with light if one has the courage to keep walking forward.